Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to look at the upcoming changes to the Victorian Child Safe Standards. And specifically for this 1 hour webinar, we're focusing on the new area of engaging children, families, and communities. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all meeting today. As this is a webinar, it's going to be many and varied, so thank you so much for joining us. And I'd also like to pay my respect to the elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to note that sometimes the conversations we have in the child safe space can be triggering for some. This can be obviously a very sensitive area, so please, if at any point during the webinar today you need to step out, feel free to do so. And if anything is raised, please talk to someone about it, whether it's a trusted friend or family member, or you can contact the numbers that you see on the screen now. Throughout the webinar today, please use the Q&A function for any questions that you might have. Please put them in there. We'll probably get to them at the end of the session. The webinar is being recorded. You'll receive a private link to that in the follow-up information that comes out after this, and all the slides that you're seeing today as well will be shared with you. So for the ones that have some significant content on it, please feel free to not have to worry about writing it all down, because we'll send it out to you. So previously, a couple of weeks ago in our last webinar, we focused on the new standards, the 11 standards, and we had some wonderful staff members from CCYP on board to explain what they were and what they might mean moving forward from the 1st of July next year. Within that, within these changes from 7 to 11, there's not specifically 4 new standards per se, but there are 4 areas and key areas of difference between what we're currently working in now and what we'll be working in from 1 July onwards. So those 4 key areas, as you can see there, relate to engaging families and communities, safety for Aboriginal children and young people, more specifically their cultural safety, managing risk around child abuse online, as well as the governance and processes and systems that organisations have in place. So this is the second in a 4-part series of webinars. The next 2 will be held early 2022, and they'll focus on safety for Aboriginal children and young people and risk management in online environments. So keep an eye out for them, and you'll be more than welcome to join us online then. But what we're looking at today is the area around engaging children, which has always been in our current 7 standards, but has been a really difficult area to crack for many of us, and also this new area around families and communities. So we're going to focus specifically on what will be standards 3 and 4 from the new set of standards around children and young people being empowered about their rights and families and communities being informed and involved. So I'll focus on the 2 new standards or the standards that you see there and what, from CCYP's perspective, compliance might look like. And then we have the wonderful Deanne from Body Safety Australia, who is going to talk you through her experience about what this actually looks like in real life. So as we move on, the standard 3, and this is what I mean by a large amount of text on some slides. Like I said, you will get all of this. Standard 3 is around children and young people being empowered about their rights, participating in decisions that affect them and being taken seriously. Now, all of this is not necessarily focusing around the various forms of child abuse that children might experience, be that physical, emotional, sexual, or psychological. But it's also about trying to think of how do we actually engage children and young people within that sporting space. And I recognise today we've got people on the webinar that are from clubland, state level and national level. So there's a real wide array of those involved here. But it's not necessarily about empowering children and young people to understand how to protect themselves from physical abuse or from sexual abuse, but it's about encouraging them to know what their rights are, allowing them to have a say in all aspects of what they do in sport, so that when the time comes that something untoward has happened or they've had a negative experience and they need to talk to someone, the relationships and the trust is there and built up so that they feel comfortable to come forward and talk to someone and work through what the problem or the issue might be, and help them understand whether it's something that can be worked through at the relevant level, or whether it is something serious and they're supported through the process of working through it. So the points that you see on the screen there, the 6 points, from CCYP's perspective, this is what they would expect to see in an organisation in terms of minimum compliance. So that children and young people are informed about their rights. So like I said, it's about safety, but it's also about how they can participate, what they should expect, who to speak to about various aspects of their engagement with sport, but ensuring they have the information they need and in a manner that they can understand. The second one is around recognising how important friendships are. And this is really important because in areas where children have been abused, they're often isolated. And we really want to encourage that recognition that friendship is important, and we want that support from others to be there. The third point here around access to sexual abuse prevention programs. Now, this is in relation to, as it says there, where it's relevant in the setting or the context. So this doesn't mean that I can understand some people reading this might go, oh, wow, now we have to provide this sort of training to children through a sports setting. That's not what we're here for. That's not what we're saying. Okay, take a step back and remember that this is all about providing a safe environment for kids, and where it's relevant and where it's appropriate, some of those conversations might need to be facilitated with experts in the field. But we're more likely to see those sorts of things occurring in the contexts of education or disability support or foster care or something like that. So please be aware of it, but don't let that be something that stops you from engaging with kids and young people as well. The fourth area around here in terms of what compliance looks like for Standard 3 is that staff and volunteers understand the signs of harm, and there's child-friendly ways for children to raise their concerns and their issues. So again, this comes back to that relationship building and ensuring that kids have the confidence and the trust to speak up and be heard. And we've seen so much over the last few months in all the media reports of what's been occurring across a number of sports, that so often children that have experienced one or another form of abuse have been too afraid to speak up and come forward because they didn't think anyone would listen. And similarly, others that have effectively been bystanders in the situation haven't known what those signs of harm might be to look for. So there's those sorts of elements of training, of understanding and relationship building that we do need to consider moving forward. The fifth one is around organisations developing a really positive child-safe culture. But again, it's about children and young people being able to participate and provide input. And so this might not, again, be about child safety per se. It might be about kids having a say in what the social functions look like moving forward, or what they might like if we're at a grassroots club, what next season might look like. If you're at a state level, it might be, okay, we're developing a new program. Let's get kids involved from the ground to help us design that and see what it looks like, so that it's all about putting kids at the centre of what we do and fostering that positive child-focused culture to ensure that what we deliver and the environments that kids experience sport in is really positive. The sixth one is around opportunities for children and young people to participate and responses to strengthen their confidence and engagement. So all of these, some of them, as you can see, are interlinked, but it all boils down to the ability to foster really strong, open, honest relationships between adults and children and young people within sport. And it doesn't necessarily have to start in the child safe space. It can start in general participation, in programs, in social events, in how they want their sport to run, how they want their club to be moving forward, anything like that. We've done some consults with kids over the last year, and the suggestions and the ideas that children have about what they want, they're very eloquent. They know what they like and what they don't like, and they have this amazing way, and I know Deanne will talk to this much more later on, they have a phenomenal way of distilling really complex issues down into really simple statements and ideas and solutions. So it is, at times, it's a difficult process to start, but it shouldn't be as scary as what you think it may be. And it might just be talking to a couple of kids. If you're at Clubland, talking to them with the coach after training. If you're at a state level, talk to the kids that might be involved in your state program. Anything like that, just to start the ball rolling. Any engagement and movement towards a really positive child safe culture is the best step, rather than doing nothing. But yeah, the kids are really smart. They're really switched on, and they know what they like. And yes, we've all been kids, but we often do forget sometimes what that experience was like and what was important to us. So this new standard here around engaging and empowering children and young people is really one of those at the forefront of everything that we should be doing, taking a child-centred approach wherever possible, getting their input and buy-in, building those trusting relationships in a positive, structured and appropriate way that sport benefits in terms of what we offer, what we deliver, and a safe environment for kids where they're happy, they're with their friends, they're having a great time, is more likely an environment where more kids are going to participate. So that's standard 3, and I'll move on now to standard 4. And this is the new standard around families and communities being informed and involved in sport. And those of you that are on the call from Clubland, you probably actually do this already without realising. But there's obviously always scope to do things a bit more. And I say this from the point of view, those of you with juniors at the club or are a specific junior club will most likely have parents involved in the committee. So if you've got some element of families being engaged and informed already, but it then becomes a bigger issue of, well, how do we ensure all the families have more opportunity to have a say, to know what's going on and to contribute. So for this standard here, from the perspective of CCYP, minimum compliance of these new standards looks like some of these 4 points here. So the first one, obviously, families participate in decisions affecting their child. So where it's possible to get the families involved of, what nights training, obviously competition is often dictated by a league that you're involved in or an association or something like that. But, in terms of how will trainings be run, what's the culture of the club, all those sorts of things, where possible, get the parents involved, ask them, especially if they're younger kids and the parents often stay during training to watch what's going on, have a chat with them. Not everything needs to be formal. The formal engagement's great, but the informal engagement and that building strong sense of community and positive child safe culture within the sporting environment is really, really important. So wherever possible, having families participate in decisions is crucial to what these standards will look like moving forward. The second point is around organisations openly communicating and engaging with families. So we want to make sure that families know and communities know what we're doing in the child safe space. So often when we work, you're speaking from my perspective as well, when we get neck deep in the work and trying to produce resources and put on events, and we learn all this stuff, but we forget how much we're not communicating out. So this one is all about ensuring that you're communicating what you're doing at a state level or at a club level or at a national level, what you're doing in terms of child safety, where the information is, how it can be accessed, all those sorts of things. This is just more than putting a policy on a website and including it in the email so that it's been, publicised and sent out. This is ongoing communication and engagement that we're looking at here, not just one-offs. The third area is around families and communities having a say, and this is more in terms of policies and practices. So the best policies are always developed with as much consultation and engagement as possible. That does make the project or the process longer, sometimes more difficult, but we need to ensure that families and communities have a voice in this. They're the people that allow their children to come to sport, to be involved in our clubs, in our sporting environment, and we need to make sure that their concerns and their voices are heard, and that what we've got in place is appropriate for now. We review a lot of policies and practices at Vicsport, and there are many that are often 10 years plus since they've been developed and haven't been reviewed. And things change substantially in that time, let alone, as we've seen over the last 2-3 years, how society has changed so much in terms of the impact of COVID. So ensuring that everyone has the say, has the opportunity to contribute is really key to ensuring that we develop the strongest policies and practices as possible, but also being open to how we can, trying what's there and then adjusting it as we need to. Just because we develop something doesn't mean it can't be changed in the future if that change is going to give us a really positive outcome. And finally, as it says there, families and carers and the community are informed about operations and governance. So again, this is about telling those within your broader sporting community, the parents and the carers, and what you're actually doing. So what's happening at an operational level in terms of child safety, what's happening at a governance level, at a board committee level in terms of child safety, what's been discussed, what are your plans? The more we talk about child safety, whether it's at a national, a state or a grassroots level, the more we talk about it, the more we destigmatise it, the more others become comfortable talking about this issue as well. The more people you'll have happy to be engaged, to assist in whichever way they can, but also it contributes again to that broader culture of child safety within the sport, of everyone playing a part and sharing a role. And also it sends a signal to individuals that might not be getting involved in sport for the best reasons possible. It sends a signal to them that, we've got an eye out here, we're focused on the kids, and if you're getting involved in our sport for reasons that aren't sport related, then we don't want you here. And we've got things in place to make sure that we look after our kids. Okay. So the new standards, these two here, they, like all of them, they can be a lot of work. But my strongest suggestion to you from our experience over the last 5 years is start small, start with something you're comfortable with, and do your best with what you can. There is so much value in starting something and starting somewhere as opposed to doing nothing. So if whatever you've got coming up next, cast a child safe lens over it and think, okay, how can we better engage children and young people in this to ensure that what we're designing, what we're pulling together, what communications are going out, they understand and they feel part of. And also, how can we engage the families in the community to let them know about it, let them have a say, and help build that child safe community, those really positive relationships moving forward. Okay, so with that, the information that you've seen in this slide and the previous slide is in one of the CCYP resources that my colleague Meredith has probably put in the chat function for you already, but that will also come around in the follow-up information after today's webinar as well. So please make sure you read through that. It has this sort of outline for all 11 standards and acts as a really good checklist to some degree around what are you doing and how can you do things moving forward. So with that in mind, I will now hand over to Deanne from Body Safety Australia. She is the CEO. Body Safety Australia is a partner of Vicsport, and Deanne has so much experience in this space. It's amazing, to be honest. We undertook some Body Safety Australia training with them last year, and it was just amazing the amount of experience and the wealth of knowledge that Deanne has. So please, you know, she's a child and youth advocate and has worked extensively across schools and organisations implementing the Child Safe Standards. So her practical experience engaging children, families and communities, there is a wealth of knowledge here. So please ask questions in the Q&A function and we will answer them at the end of the session. And yeah, enjoy. I'll pass it over to Deanne.
Thanks, Fiona, and thanks for that great overview of the new standards that we're going to be talking about today. I'm just going to pop my screen on for everybody. I also would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I am. It's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us here today. So I want to talk about engaging community, engaging children, engaging families. And what we know about community is it's much more than belonging to something. It's doing something together that makes belonging matter. And I think that quote from Brian Solis is really pertinent to sports, because it's not just about coming in and playing the sport, it's about building something as a team or as a group of individuals that builds community that's so much greater than the parts. And I want you just to keep that in mind as we're going through. So I'm not going to run through this. Fiona's already spoken about it, which is awesome. Doing deep engagement takes time, as Fiona said. It does take time, and it can feel a little bit scary when you get started if you have been in a situation where, you know, decision making has been held by leadership or by coaches. But we know that there are so many benefits to it. For me, one of the greatest benefits is it's fun. It's really great fun, and we can actually gain so much from it ourselves when we engage in it. But positive emotional outcomes for the athletes and the coaches, increased knowledge and skill for all involved. So you will increase your knowledge and skill, but also the children and young people that you are working with will have skills that they can take into their lives as they move beyond, you know, where they are at the moment. Increased confidence. Everyone feels really proud of their accomplishment. It's not just another thing to tick off the box, but there's a real sense of pride and coming together in that pride. So it really builds that relationship. Increased trust in you, in the sporting organisation, from all involved, from the children, the young people, families and the broader community, which is, you know, obviously then leads to increased engagement as well. We know that there are increased levels of help seeking if a child is being harmed or is at risk of harm. So as Fiona said, even if you're doing this level of engagement around something that's got nothing to do with child safety, it might be, what are we going to do for our end of year breakup? That builds the relationship that then makes a child much more likely to help seek from the adults in that space. It fosters creativity, which of course then feeds into capacity for sports. Significantly increases user engagement. What do I mean by that? So I'm going to talk a little bit later about co-designing and getting children and communities involved in developing the code of conduct. What we see in that space is that when they have been involved in the design of it, when they have been really, truly, deeply consulted in that space, they're actually much more likely to adhere to it and to ensure that other people are adhering to it than if something is just handed to them. Identifies issues that may not have been obvious to you beforehand. So you may have your own experience of sport and you'll come obviously with that lens and the experience that you've gained in your role. But then the issues that the children are coming up with and the families are coming up with may be outside of your lived and professional experience. And so suddenly something that has never been on your radar is squarely on your radar, and there are things that you can do about it. And also we know that this increases participation from a diverse range of athletes. So even beyond the child safety, it means that you'll have greater engagement with the club or the sport. All right, and what happens when you don't engage? Look, I just picked up a few things that have been in the media in the last maybe week, if that. So this was in the paper today, Trinity DeLance speaking out about her experience in gymnastics, and in the paper today, it was talking about how Trinity actually fractured her spine because the coach pushing her. But the actual part of this that I want to talk about is that she didn't feel that she could speak to her coaches because they kept pushing her, but she also didn't feel that she could speak with her parents. Yeah. So we want to start breaking that down where the young athletes, whether it's an elite level or a recreational level, feel that they can speak up if anything, because we're teaching children to be aware of their bodies, to be aware of what is healthy risk-taking, pushing their boundaries, and what is actually dangerous. And if we're not listening when they're telling us that things are becoming dangerous for them, then that trust is getting broken. Maddie Groves, I know a lot of you will know about, Maddie's situation that she's been speaking out about recently. But again, she's been saying, I didn't feel like I could make a complaint. I didn't feel that I could speak up. There were things that within my sport were really normalized. And when people did speak up, it appeared that nothing happened. So again, we've got two very disempowered young people here. I know both elite athletes, but it's also happening in grassroots levels. This one's a little bit different. So Josh Cavallo, can you believe on the cover of the magazine, the world's only openly gay top-tier footballer? The world's only openly gay top-tier footballer. Well, we know that he's not the only gay top-tier footballer. If we extrapolate from the population, there would be many, many gay footballers. So why is he the only openly gay one? If that print's a bit small for some of you, he says, I remember a game where I just started thinking in the middle of it how I would tell my friends and family about my sexuality. I reached a point where I was considering whether my happiness was worth more to me than playing football. And then he goes on to talk about going to the World Cup and knowing that it's being played in a place where there's actually the threat of death penalty for LGBTIQA people. So when we talk about engaging with communities, we're not just talking about multicultural communities or disability, we're also talking about what are the things that are stopping people being their authentic self at the club and perhaps preventing other people who belong to that minority joining the club. Yeah. I'm going to speak more about that. All right, so I know that you'll be speaking about diversity in another space, but here is just a little bit of a snapshot of diversity within Australia. What we know from this is that as an individual, you cannot know the lived experience of all of the people, all of the lived experience of diversity within Australia. You can't. It's just impossible. You can do as much learning as possible, but you know, you will never know what it's like to be really loving sport and being hearing impaired or deaf if that's not your own personal experience. And so what we actually need to do in this space is to hear from as many voices as possible to ensure that things that we might not have picked up are being implemented in our clubs and sports. All right. So I'm going to go on to what does it look like to engage. Firstly, I want to talk about engaging with children and young people. The very, very first thing that you need to do before you start this work is establish safety. If you are coming at this from, you know, from the very start, it's slow work and it's careful work. And the young people have to know that they are safe to speak up. And it's actually talking explicitly about that. Providing opportunities for anonymous feedback over and over again, particularly with teens. They've told us that they want mechanisms to be able to provide feedback anonymously. Removing the barriers to engagement. I'm going to talk about all of these things. Co-design, which is a term that some of you may have heard before that I'm going to talk more about later. Engaging with technology. This is really huge. This is the children and young people's lived experience. This is what they have had to do over the last 2 years to maintain all of their relationships via technology. And so it's really important that us as adults engage with it. We need a deep understanding of the power imbalances. So as adults and children, there's an inherent power imbalance, but there are other power imbalances too. And then understand that when we hold power in a situation, we need to do the work of stepping in to ensure that the other person feels safe to speak. And also dismantling victim blaming, which I'll speak more about. When we talk about engaging with families and communities, again, we need to think about how do we remove the barriers to engagement? What is stopping families and communities with engaging with us? Why are they not speaking up? We need to think about multiple methods of engagement because one form is not going to suit everybody. Again, co-design, education opportunities, and boundary setting as well. So when we talk about establishing safety, we need to do this because young people might not be forthcoming in feedback as there's an established power imbalance between themselves and the adults in the club. The young people that we've worked with express concerns that raising the issues may impact decisions about their progression in the sport or the team. So if I speak up and say that that coach is making me feel unsafe, then perhaps I won't get picked for the team, or perhaps I won't get picked to play at that competition. And so that keeps young people silenced in so many spaces. And also sometimes the person who is making them uncomfortable or even harming them is involved in the consultation process. So this also silences young people. You know, we're inviting them in for a conversation. We're checking in with them, but actually we don't know that the person who is making them feel uncomfortable or is actually putting them at risk of harm is in the room with them. And so they're not going to speak up. So these are some of the things that you need to consider. And as Fiona said, you can start with small things. You can start with what are we going to do for our end of year breakup? So that you can start observing whether they feel safe and setting up that pattern before you tackle the really big topics. When we set up a conversation with young people, these are some of the points that we explicitly talk to in order for them to know and to contribute to making things a safe conversation. So all people will respect people's physical and emotional boundaries. They will respect people's opinions, beliefs, differing states of being and differing points of view. Everyone is expected to be responsible for their own actions and aware that their actions have an effect on others. We ask people to examine their own subtle and not so subtle prejudices. So if somebody says that, that opinion is actually harmful, instead of being defensive, sitting back and going, okay, why am I feeling defensive in this space? Drawing clear boundaries that any group that is engaging in violence, whether that's emotional, physical, sexual, or threatens another's safety within the space, will be excluding themselves. So you are setting a hard boundary that there is no space for people to be harmful. If you experience or witness any behaviour that crosses your boundaries or makes you uncomfortable, or you'd like to talk to somebody, please ask a facilitator or a teacher. Young people need permission to do that. And take responsibility for your own safety and get help if you need it. So these are some of the things that we set up, particularly when we're talking with teenagers. A little bit simpler when we're working with younger children. On top of that, though, we also say that you have the right to find out things and share what you think with others by talking, drawing, writing, or in any other way, unless it harms or offends other people. So what you're doing when you actually state this as part of their rights, you're saying that there is no space for racism, for ableism, for sexism, for homophobia, for transphobia, and that we will actually set a boundary, not around curiosity, but, for instance, if you're talking about trans athletes, there might be a space of going, but which bathroom will they use? That's curiosity. But there will be no space for, no, they can't use our bathroom because, trans women are rapists, right? So that's drawing a hard boundary around, actually, there is no space for opinions that are negative towards people whose human rights are protected by law. Okay. So how do you remove barriers for children and young people? So one of the things that you can do is use an external body to conduct focus groups or co-design workshops. That removes the balance of power, and that removes the risk that there might be somebody in the room who is already intimidating for the children. Using anonymous channels for feedback and suggestions, they really do like it, and not just the pen and paper, because sometimes children and young people actually much prefer a digital form of communication. And also with the pen and paper, if it's in an open space, people will see them writing and then maybe ask them lots of questions or flag that that's the person who's asking. There are lots and lots of apps that you can use, lots of different platforms that you can use for anonymous feedback. And if you're not across it, ask them what's the easiest to use. It's ever evolving, and the young people will know they've done 2 years of remote learning. Be creative in your engagement methods, because you need to allow for very young children to engage. And we have done co-design with children as young as 3, which was a lot of, drawing and taking pictures, and you can even use GoPros. I can talk more about that. You need to allow for children with a disability to have a voice in here, children from a non-English speaking background to engage as fully as any other child. So really start to be creative about, what method are we using to capture all of the voices, not just the ones that we hear from most frequently. I want to talk about engaging with technology. So digital technology is one of the biggest facilitators of risk to children and young people. We actually know that over the last 2 years during COVID, the number of child sexual abuse material, images and videos that were produced in Victoria skyrocketed, and the number of young people who were put at risk due to people coercing them, threatening them, blackmailing them to send them sexual content skyrocketed. So we really need to understand the risk of digital technology. It is being used by adults to groom, abuse and bully, and it is being used by children and young people to do the same. It can be tempting to go, right, that's it, no phones, put your phones away, we're not having them here, we're not having them there. It actually doesn't work. It's not the way to approach digital technology as a risk. Educative approaches are much more effective. However, they must be accompanied by adult understanding of the platforms, not just the platforms, but how the children and young people are using them. And guess what? As adults, even if you are an adult in your 20s, the only way for you to know how young people are using different platforms is to ask them. So at the moment, you know, lots and lots of the athletes will be on TikTok, and they're probably picking up some really great tips and sharing some really great tips on TikTok. But there's also a risk of harm in that as well. But this is where, as adults, we need to inform ourselves first before we can start engaging with solutions in this space in conjunction with the young people. I want to talk a little bit about victim blaming, because this comes up a lot when we work in sports environments and when we work with teenagers. So we all know the what was she wearing. So if a woman or a girl says that she is sexually assaulted, it's at night, she's been drinking. You know, a lot of people will go, well, what was she doing out so late? Why was she drinking when she's underage? What was she wearing? Who was she with? Why did she make those stupid decisions? And all of those questions are heaping blame on the victim and the person who's speaking up, saying that they've been victimized. And all that does is silence the young person. I know that a lot of you will know about that, but actually what I want to talk more about is around when we're talking about digital technology particularly, because what we're actually seeing here is an issue around what the law says, people's interpretation of the law and the intent of the law, and how we speak to young people about bullying, harassment, sexual assaults that occur in online spaces. So what I see a lot of is, say you have a teenager and that teenager's sexual image has been shared amongst everybody in the team. What I see is a lot of adults step into that space and go, why were you so stupid? Don't you know that it's against the law for you to share that image? You could get into trouble with the police for sharing that image, etc., 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 etc. Meanwhile, we have a young person whose image is out there and who's actually a victim because somebody else has done the sharing. So in Victoria, what the law intends is for young people to, if they are sharing consensual nudes, so if they're taking a photo of themselves and sharing it with a romantic or sexual partner, and it's just between the two of them, the law doesn't intend to criminalise those two young people. What it does intend to do is, if a young person is being coerced or threatened or blackmailed, or if those images are being taken covertly, or if somebody shares those images either with or without consent, the law intends to protect the person whose image it was and to address the behaviour of the person who shared or took that image or blackmailed, or, you know, whatever it might be. What we do in this space is we often silence people. Now, if you apply that to a sporting environment, you'll see a lot of situations occur where somebody might take a video within a change room, share it on TikTok in order to mock another person. What we want to do there is really let the person know whose image it is let them know that they have a right to help seek, and they have a capacity to be empowered to find the solutions. The other thing that I want to talk about in that is understanding trauma and the way survivors of family violence, sexual violence, and other traumas might behave. So again, what we actually see is particularly when we have athletes who may be pubescent, adolescent, and we have, for instance, coaches or parents of other athletes, we might see that from the outside, it looks like the athlete is being perhaps flirty, and so we can tend to victim blame and go, well, she's grown up so fast, or she's always been mature for her age. Actually, often those things are a sign of previous sexual trauma. And so what we're doing is blaming a victim instead of supporting a victim in that space. So I know that for a lot of you, particularly those of you who are volunteers, taking the time to learn about, how trauma presents can be quite onerous, but it's really important when we're looking at behaviours and starting to understand behaviours so that we can provide the best support. All right. I'm going to talk for a second about consent, and because consent is not just sexual consent. And when we think about athletes and the need for touch between coaches and athletes, consent comes into play in that as well, or between athletes, or, in any of the spaces. So consent is both people want to share touch. Yep. So it might look like a coach saying, can I just correct your grip? And the athlete going, yeah, sure. And force, obviously, is somebody uses violence or physical behaviour to overpower someone to do something that they don't want to do. But in between those spaces, this is where we get, where we start to be more subtle in our child safe approach. So we understand that athletes will tend to be compliant. They want to become better at their sport. They understand that the coaches have more knowledge than they do, and they want to learn from them. Yeah, they don't want to cause trouble. They don't want to push back on someone who has power to make decisions about their sport. So they will tend to be compliant. And then if you couple that with someone who tends to pressure, so keeps asking you just one more, just, I know that you've got it in you, do another lap, do another burpee, whatever it might be, what we then tend to see is non-consensual behaviour, where somebody is pressuring a child, whether that's a parent or a coach or another athlete, particularly if it's a team sport and the rest of the team, feels like if that athlete takes a break, it might affect how the team plays. And couple that with somebody being compliant, and you start to have risk in that space. Okay. All right. So when we think about, and if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, because we will have time for that afterwards. When we think about barriers to engagement for families and communities, we might have language barriers for families where English is a second or subsequent language. There might be a lack of community visibility leading to distrust or reluctance to engage. And time, we know that time is a major barrier to family and community engagement. So what can you do if language is a barrier? Can you have translators available? Can you have things translated? Can you increase visible signs that welcome marginalised communities? For instance, if you, if you live anywhere in Australia, do you have signs that say that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are welcomed and that they, there will be a culture of safety there? Do you have, rainbow flags or trans flags that say that members of the LGBTIQA community are welcome here? Do you have staff members and volunteers from marginalised communities? Or are you just a reflection of the players that you currently have, but not of your broader community? Do you have signs up in your physical environment in multiple languages, in the languages not necessarily of the families that you already have, but the families within the broader community? Do you mark the days of celebration? So, you know, you might not roster a match on for Christmas, but do you also not roster a match on for days of celebration for other major religions? When we think about time barriers, are you inviting families and communities in person, but do you also give them opportunities to give feedback or engage via digital technology in a group setting such as this, via digital technology in their own time, because the time that they might have is 5 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock at night, or on site in their own time? Is there a suggestion box up in your foyer or wherever it might be? And then obviously it's really important that you have education opportunities, and this doesn't mean that you have to run all of them, but your local council, if you are at a grassroots level, will often have education opportunities. As Fiona said, the one of the Child Safe Standards says, you know, about education around preventing childhood sexual abuse. It might not be something that you put on, but often your local council will put something on, and if you connect with the council and then invite families in, you know, that's a great way to get that message across. So parents and carers are experts in their own children, absolutely, but they're not experts in the sport, not often, or in child risk and safety. And sometimes the threat of harm comes from a parent or carer towards their own child or other children, when you think about, you know, sledging that happens in those spaces. So hosting education sessions can help minimise risk, increase parent understanding, but it also really empowers supportive and protective parents to become upstanders. So they better understand that if they're noticing something, they can step in, and they also know if it needs to be escalated, who they escalate that to and how. So once a club or sporting environment has engaged in deep collaborative work in child safety, it then becomes easier for all adults to set boundaries around inappropriate or unsafe behaviour. So if you think about the times where you know, parents haven't abided by the code of conduct, and you've had to over and over and over again say things like, you know, you can't say that at a sporting match, you will have to, you know, you'll have to leave if you keep swearing at the children, or you can't take photos here because, you know, we have a, and you know it's because there's a child there who has family violence in their background, there are orders in place that their image cannot appear online. What actually happens is if you've done this deep consultation with parents and caregivers, that burden is then shared with the broader community, and you're not constantly having to do that, because sometimes the parent sitting next to them can go, hey, pop your camera away, remember, you know, no photos. Yeah. So a lot of work to start with, but it actually will make your life so much easier. All right, I want to talk quickly about co-design because I'm aware of the time. So co-design is and this is my favorite thing to do, collaborative response to creating new solutions. It invites all people with an interest in child safety in your environment to contribute to child safety. It understands that different parties hold different professional and lived experience, and that bringing all of these together creates the strongest response. Results can't just be cut and paste across communities, although they can inform other community responses. And co-design, really importantly, doesn't just mean handing over the decision-making to children. So I'm going to rip through quickly. First, you start with a body of evidence, and then you go into planning, designing, delivering, and reviewing. And I'll give you an example of that in a second. So you already have a really strong evidence base. You have the Child Safe Standards, the Royal Commission recommendations. You have your existing policies, procedures, and codes of conduct. And you have lots and lots of case studies to draw from as well. So what you want to do then is think about the cohorts that you're inviting in for this conversation: athletes, coaches, volunteers, staff, parents, community members who maybe aren't engaged in the sport but are important within your community. Develop focus group questions. So if you are thinking about your end of year party, one of those focus group questions could be, should this be inside or outside? You know, and you'll come up with all of the responses that may be things that you've never thought of. Engage key stakeholders across participating sports. And then do an analysis of your qualitative and quantitative data, and then there'll be recommendations from that. So with the recommendations, you'll then develop initiatives informed by by consultation with key stakeholders. But that might be as simple as, oh yeah, heard from everyone, this is what we're doing for our Christmas party. Or it might be really deep work around, you know, for instance, wow, you know, we're thinking about new sports uniforms, and we knew that, you know, the girls wanted X, Y, Z, but we also didn't realise all of these different things that we had to take into account, like the fabric is actually, you know, fabric that for perhaps some of our athletes who have sensory processing disorders, you know, we need a different type of fabric, right? So you're then working in that space. And then when you've done that work, you deliver it back to the people who have been engaged. All right, so I'm going to give you a little case study of work that we did a couple of years ago. So the problem was that the code of conduct, and this was at a school, was not engaged with. Children, parents and teachers could not reference the code when asked. So the school had this awesome code of conduct. It had been taken from the Department of Education. It had been tweaked for that particular school. Nobody had read it, even though parents and teachers had signed off that they had. Or if they had read it, they'd skimmed it. They couldn't really refer to it. So we had a co-design process. We did workshops with school leadership, with parents and children, and the outcome was a new code of conduct informed by all stakeholders. In doing that, we recruited participants for diversity, so we had a range of different voices. These are the students, so you can see they're a reasonably equal split, gender split there. We had children as young as 5 in the groups. And then as far as their background, you can see the flags down the bottom, all of the different countries or nationalities, or for our Aboriginal children, the fact that they're First Nation, that the children came from. But we also had children who lived with their mum and their dad. We had children who had same-sex parents, who were adopted, who were living in out-of-home care. So and we had children with a disability as well. So we really had input from a wide cross range of the cohort, the school cohort. And this is the code of conduct they came up with after the whole co-design process. So we started with their original code of conduct, wrote it in child-friendly language, asked them what they thought. So we had a series of workshops that ran for an hour with each group of children. After the hour, they then worked with the art teacher to do an artistic representation of their thoughts from the session. What came up in this code of conduct is that they really simplified some ideas. So the adults had really got stuck on what do we do about photos, and what do we do about messaging children who we might know outside of the school? And the children were able to simplify that so quickly. So don't take photos. Don't take photos or videos of children without consent of the parent, guardian and the child. Don't share photos of the or videos of the children without consent of the parent, guardian and the child. They were really great with that. But one of the really, really awesome things was the children wrote into their code of conduct, trust us, trust our independence, and encourage us to take risks so that we can learn and grow and mature. So they were able to understand that safety isn't about wrapping them in cotton wool, but actually giving them opportunities for risk taking within a network of being safe. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that you can produce. All right. And then, yeah, there was something else in here. Yeah, the children simplified it. Be kind to children, families, and adults. And if someone needs help, help them. If someone needs a hug, give them a hug. Okay. We've done many other things in this space, and with children as young as 3, as I said. And sometimes we have a look at the physical environment, and sometimes that is children mapping where they feel safe and not safe in their physical environment. Sometimes it's like putting a GoPro on their head and seeing things from their perspective. So I will throw open to the Q&A now, because I know that we're right on time. Thanks, Fiona.
Thanks, Deanne. That was great. I hope for those of you on the line, there were a couple of really good tips and hints that you can take away from that. And, you know, we know that in terms of capacity, really big, in-depth, 6-month focus groups and reports, it's not always possible and practical, but do what you can, make things smaller, engage where you can, get the voice heard, and start to really listen to what kids are saying. They are really switched on. The engagement I've done since working with Deanne has really highlighted just they know what they want. They know simple things that we don't think are a big deal, like, oh, can I be buddied up with someone when I start at this club because I don't know anyone else here. And we think, well, it's a safe space, you'll be fine, but it's still an intimidating and large space for them to walk into. So provide that opportunity where they can talk, engage, and provide suggestions, and you really will reap the benefits in the long run. I know today's probably provided a wealth of information and ideas, and please, if you do have a question, pop it in the Q&A while we start to wrap up. But you know, take what you can, start small. You know, every big oak tree starts from a seed, so start small, do what you can, and look at that a year later and start to grow it again. Is some of the best advice that I would pass on from our 5 years of working in this space. There's a long way to go, but there's so many other sports, so many other people in exactly the same position as you. So for those of you at a grassroots level, please reach out to other clubs nearby, reach out to your state body for support and advice. You're welcome to reach out to us as well. State bodies on the call, obviously RSAs, LGAs, feel free to give us a buzz and we'll help you wherever we can. And if there's any NSOs on the line as well, you know the networks to speak through. So please do so. Now, we haven't had any questions in the chat, so maybe we've answered a few and provided some good ideas, which is wonderful. Oh, hang on, what was that I just saw pop up? Oh, thank you for your comment, Sandra. That's great to see that you enjoyed that. I have just, okay. Now I actually have just hit a button and I don't know what I've done. That's okay. Look, otherwise, today wraps up our Child Safe webinars for this year. Next year, as I've already mentioned, we've got the Aboriginal Youth and Cultural Safety webinar and one around online environments. Those of you on the call from SSAs and RSAs, we have the Community of Practice will be taking place again next year, so get in touch if you're not already involved. We will have some new resources coming out too, and my colleague Meredith will be popping a link in the chat function shortly for you to provide some feedback on today's webinar. We would love to hear what you thought and how we could make things better for you, so please let us know. Otherwise, we are nearly it for today. So if there's no further questions, Deanne, thank you so much for your time. Oh, hang on, there is one now. Oh no, it's another statement. Thank you, Yvette. I'm glad there was content in there for you to take away. The slides will come around, the links will come around, including the link to this webinar. Otherwise, I think that's about it. Deanne, thank you so much. I always find another little gem to take away and put into our work moving forward. It's a pleasure working with you.
Thanks,
and to everyone on the call, thank you so much for your work this year in this space. I know it's tough. I know it's tiring. Sometimes you feel like you're taking one step forward and 10 steps back. But we are making progress, and every little step forward you make does make a difference to a child's life. This is a very rare area in sport where you will make a significant and lasting impact on kids if you engage with them and provide them that safe environment. So thank you so much for what you do. We'll never know how much of an impact we have, but hopefully we have a really big positive impact. And on that note, have a wonderful festive break for those of you that are having some time off. The Vicsport office will be closed for a bit over the Christmas New Year period, but we will be back online early in January. So thank you so much. If you think of anything after the webinar, feel free to send us an email. And that's about it. Thanks, everybody. It's been great to see you, and have a great new year. We'll see you in 2022.